When four corporate lawyers physically surrounded and pushed a black mediator during a high-stakes business dispute in downtown Chicago, they never expected their careers to be destroyed by what happened next. What occurred in the following 48 hours didn't just end their legal practices. It exposed a pattern of intimidation that had been silencing professional women for years. Vanessa Reynolds had been mediating corporate disputes for over a decade, building a reputation as one of the most respected neutrals in Illinois. But nobody knew she had developed the habit of recording every session after experiencing subtle discrimination early in her career. What started as self-protection would become the key to bringing down an entire culture of legal bullying. The case was supposed to be routine, a contract dispute between two major corporations. Instead, it became the moment when institutional intimidation met someone who had been quietly preparing for exactly this confrontation. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's been watching, recording, and patiently building evidence. The morning of October 15, 2024, started like any other Tuesday for Vanessa Reynolds. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, she arrived at the prestigious Millennium Tower in downtown Chicago, her heels clicking confidently across the marble lobby. The 42-year-old mediator carried herself with the quiet authority that had made her one of the most sought-after neutrals in corporate America. Vanessa had built her reputation the hard way. After graduating magna cum laude from Northwestern Law School, she'd spent 15 years in litigation before transitioning to mediation. Her success rate was extraordinary. Over 90% of her cases settled, often saving companies millions in prolonged court battles. But what made her truly exceptional wasn't just her legal acumen. It was her ability to read people, to see through the posturing and get to the heart of what really mattered. Today's case involved TechFlow Industries, a rapidly growing software company, and Megacorp Solutions, a Fortune 500 conglomerate. The dispute centered on a licensing agreement worth $50 million, exactly the kind of high-stakes corporate warfare that had become Vanessa's specialty. As she stepped into the elevator heading to the 45th floor, Vanessa performed her usual pre-mediation ritual. She checked her phone one last time, ensuring it was fully charged. What appeared to be a simple habit was actually something much more strategic. Years ago, after experiencing subtle but persistent undermining in male-dominated legal environments, Vanessa had started recording her sessions. Not for malicious purposes, but for protection, to ensure that her words, her decisions, and her authority couldn't be misrepresented later. The elevator doors opened to reveal the opulent conference room where today's mediation would take place. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan, while rich mahogany furniture and crystal water glasses spoke of serious money at stake. Vanessa arrived 30 minutes early, as always, to set up and prepare her mind for the psychological chess match ahead. She arranged her materials methodically, legal pads, pens, copies of the relevant documents, and her phone, positioned discreetly but strategically to capture audio. The device looked innocent enough, just another piece of technology in a room full of laptops and tablets. But what they didn't realize was that this unassuming phone would soon become the most important piece of evidence in a case that would shake the legal community. At exactly 9:20 a.m., the first participants began arriving. Mason Washington, CEO of TechFlow Industries, entered with his usual nervous energy. The 38-year-old entrepreneur had built his company from a garage startup to a $200 million enterprise, but today's dispute threatened everything he'd worked for. His legal team consisted of 2 attorneys from a mid-sized firm, competent, professional, and clearly intimidated by the opposing counsel they were about to face. But what they didn't realize was that something far more dangerous than legal intimidation was about to unfold. At 9:15 a.m., the atmosphere in the conference room shifted dramatically. The elevator doors opened to reveal Logan Beaumont, the lead attorney from Whitman, Kessler & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious and ruthless law firms. Logan strode in like he owned the building, which, given his firm's influence, he practically did. At 45 years old, Logan embodied everything about old money legal power. His tailored suit cost more than most people's monthly salary, his Harvard Law School ring caught the light just so, and his confident smile suggested he'd never lost a case he cared about winning. Behind him followed his team, Parker Spencer, Preston Maxwell, and Lance Stone, three younger attorneys who treated Logan like a general and opposing parties like enemies to be crushed. "Ms. Reynolds," Logan said, extending his hand with practiced charm, "I've heard impressive things about your work, though I have to say this case seems pretty straightforward. TechFlow clearly breached their contract, and we're here to ensure Megacorp gets appropriate compensation." Vanessa shook his hand firmly, noting the subtle condescension in his tone. "Mr. Beaumont, I've reviewed the materials extensively. I think you'll find this case has more complexity than initially appears." Logan's smile faltered slightly. In his world, mediators were supposed to be grateful for his presence, deferential to his expertise. The fact that this woman, this black woman, seemed to be suggesting he hadn't done his homework properly was already setting him on edge. Parker Spencer, eager to impress his boss, jumped in. "With respect, Ms. Reynolds, our client has clear documentation of TechFlow's breach. The licensing agreement specifically states—" "I'm familiar with the contract terms," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "But before we discuss specifics, let's establish our ground rules. This is a confidential mediation. Everything said here is privileged and protected. We're here to find a solution that works for both parties, not to rehearse arguments for trial." Preston Maxwell exchanged a glance with Lance Stone. Neither was accustomed to being lectured about legal procedure by a mediator, especially not one who seemed so confident in challenging their approach. Logan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Though I think you'll find that sometimes the facts are so clear that there's really only one reasonable outcome." The tension in the room was palpable. Mason Washington and his attorneys sensed they were watching something more than just preliminary posturing. There was an undercurrent of disrespect, a subtle but unmistakable suggestion that Vanessa didn't quite belong in this room with these powerful men. But Vanessa had been here before. She'd learned to recognize the signs, the slightly longer pauses before acknowledging her points, the way her authority was questioned just a bit more than a male mediator's would be, the assumption that she could be intimidated or overwhelmed. What they didn't know was that she'd been preparing for this moment for years. As the morning progressed, the pattern became clear. Every time Vanessa tried to redirect the conversation toward productive negotiation, Logan's team pushed back harder. They interrupted her more frequently, questioned her suggestions more aggressively, and began speaking directly to each other as if she weren't there. By 11:30 a.m., what should have been professional disagreement had escalated into something much more dangerous. And Vanessa's phone, sitting innocuously on the table, was capturing every word. But what happened next would change everything forever. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine caucus break. Vanessa had suggested separate meetings with each side, standard mediation practice to explore settlement possibilities without the pressure of the opposing party present. But when she proposed starting with TechFlow's team, Logan Beaumont's response revealed the true nature of what was happening. "I think we need to discuss your approach first," Logan said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there earlier. "My clients are paying substantial fees for this mediation, and frankly, we're not seeing the kind of progress we expected." Vanessa remained calm, years of experience having taught her to never react emotionally to pressure tactics. "Mr. Beaumont, we're only 2 hours into a complex commercial dispute. Progress takes time when—" "Time is money," Parker Spencer interrupted, emboldened by his senior partner's aggressive tone. "And right now it feels like we're being managed rather than mediated." The word managed hung in the air like a slap. In legal circles it was code, a way of suggesting that someone was overstepping their authority, trying to control situations they weren't qualified to handle. When directed at a black woman in a room full of white male attorneys, the subtext was unmistakable. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. The phone on the table continued recording, capturing not just words but tone, inflection, and the growing hostility that was transforming a professional mediation into something much darker. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns about efficiency," Vanessa said evenly, "but mediation requires patience and trust in the process. If you're not comfortable with my approach—" "It's not about comfort," Preston Maxwell cut in. "It's about results. Megacorp didn't become a Fortune 500 company by accepting delays and excuses. Lance Stone, the youngest of the group, sensed his moment to impress. Maybe we need someone with more experience in high-stakes commercial disputes. The insult was carefully crafted, questioning her experience while avoiding explicitly mentioning race or gender, but everyone in the room understood the message. This successful, accomplished attorney with over a decade of mediation experience was being told she wasn't qualified for the job. Mason Washington shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His own attorneys looked appalled, but uncertain how to respond. They were witnessing something that went far beyond normal legal advocacy, but they were also outgunned by one of the most powerful firms in the city. Vanessa stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Mr. Beaumont, I think we need to pause and reset. This level of hostility toward the mediator is counterproductive and unprofessional." Logan's eyes flashed with something dangerous. In his world, he was never challenged so directly, especially not by someone he clearly viewed as beneath his station. "Ms. Reynolds, I think you're misreading the situation. We are simply advocating for our client's interests." "By attacking the neutral party?" Vanessa's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the calm surface. "That's not advocacy, gentlemen. That's intimidation." The word intimidation seemed to snap something in Logan. He stood as well, his height advantage obvious, as he looked down at Vanessa. "I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you make." Parker, Preston, and Lance also rose from their chairs. Whether planned or instinctive, the effect was immediate and unmistakable. 4 large men now stood while Vanessa remained positioned near the wall, effectively surrounded. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from professional tension to something that felt genuinely threatening. Mason Washington's team watched in horror, recognizing that they were witnessing something that went far beyond normal legal disputes. But what none of them realized was that Vanessa had been preparing for exactly this moment for years. Every subtle slight, every undermining comment, every instance of having her authority questioned had led to this confrontation. And unlike previous times when she'd had to absorb the disrespect and move forward, this time she had evidence. Her phone continued recording as the 4 attorneys closed ranks around her, their body language screaming dominance and intimidation. But instead of backing down, Vanessa stood her ground, her mind already calculating how this moment would play out in disciplinary hearings, civil suits, and professional consequences these men couldn't yet imagine. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's been waiting patiently for others to reveal their true nature. What happened next would be dissected in legal ethics classes for years to come. As the 4 attorneys formed a semicircle around Vanessa, their intent was clear. Use physical presence and intimidation to force her into compliance. It was a tactic that had probably worked countless times before with other women, other minorities, other professionals who lacked the power or preparation to fight back. Logan stepped closer, now less than 2 feet from Vanessa. His voice dropped to what he probably thought was a menacing whisper, but the conference room's acoustics and her phone's recording capability captured every word. "Ms. Reynolds, I think you've forgotten who's paying for this mediation. Megacorp's legal fees fund more mediations in this city than you could handle in a lifetime. Perhaps you should consider whether this is the hill you want to die on." Parker Spencer moved to Vanessa's left side. "We're not asking for much. Just acknowledge that this case has obvious merits and help us reach a reasonable settlement." Preston Maxwell closed in from the right. Sometimes experienced mediators know when to guide parties toward the inevitable conclusion. Lance Stone, the youngest but perhaps most eager to prove himself, completed the circle by stepping behind Vanessa. "We're all professionals here, let's act like it." The irony was staggering. 4 men physically cornering a woman while demanding she act professional. But what they'd miscalculated was Vanessa's response. Instead of cowering or capitulating, she stood straighter, her voice carrying clearly across the room to where Mason Washington and his attorneys sat in stunned silence. "Gentlemen, you need to step back immediately. This behavior is inappropriate and frankly actionable." Logan's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Actionable? We're having a conversation about mediation strategy." "This isn't a conversation," Vanessa replied firmly. "This is intimidation, and it stops now." That's when Logan made the decision that would destroy his career. Instead of stepping back, he moved even closer, now barely a foot away from Vanessa's face. "I think you're being dramatic. We're all lawyers here. We can handle robust discussion." Vanessa turned to walk toward the door, but Preston Maxwell shifted to block her path. "Where are you going? We're not finished talking." "Yes, we are," Vanessa said, trying to step around him. That's when the physical contact began. Preston didn't exactly shove her, but he placed his hand on her shoulder and applied pressure, enough to stop her movement, enough to assert physical dominance, enough to cross the line from verbal intimidation to physical coercion. "Don't walk away from us," Lance Stone said, moving closer to her back. Parker Spencer reached out and grabbed her other arm. "We need to finish this conversation." For perhaps 30 seconds, the four attorneys physically restrained Vanessa Reynolds in that conference room. They surrounded her, touched her without permission, and used their size and numbers to prevent her from leaving. In their minds, they were probably just being forceful in their advocacy. In reality, they were committing assault. But here's what they didn't know. Vanessa's phone wasn't just recording audio. The device had been strategically positioned to capture video as well, and its high-definition camera was documenting every moment of their intimidation tactics. When they finally released her and stepped back, perhaps realizing they'd gone too far, Vanessa calmly walked to the table and picked up her phone. Her hands were steady, her voice controlled, but her eyes held a fury that should have warned them about what was coming. "This mediation is terminated," she announced. "Mr. Washington, you and your team are free to go." "Gentlemen," she turned to Logan's crew, "you'll be hearing from the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission, the Chicago Bar Association, and my attorney. What just happened was assault, battery, false imprisonment, and professional misconduct. And unlike most such incidents, this one was recorded." Logan's face went white. "You recorded us, without consent." Vanessa's smile was sharp as a blade. "Illinois is a one-party consent state, Mr. Beaumont. I only needed my own permission to record, which I had." The silence that followed was deafening. Four successful attorneys, men who had built careers on intimidating opponents and dominating negotiations, suddenly realized they had just destroyed everything they'd worked for. But what they didn't yet understand was that this was only the beginning, because Vanessa Reynolds wasn't just going to file complaints and sue for damages. She was about to expose a pattern of behavior that would bring down not just their careers but the entire culture of intimidation they represented. The real reckoning was just getting started. The elevator ride down from the 45th floor felt eternal. Vanessa stood alone, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon of mass destruction, which, in a sense, it was. The 23-minute recording she'd just captured would soon become the most important piece of evidence in multiple legal proceedings. But as the elevator descended, Vanessa's mind wasn't focused on revenge or even justice. Instead, she was thinking about all the other women who had faced similar intimidation and walked away with nothing but bruises to their dignity and careers. The associates who'd been screamed at in conference rooms, the opposing counsel who'd been physically crowded during depositions, the expert witnesses who'd been dismissed and undermined simply for being female or black or both. This was bigger than just four badly behaved attorneys. This was about a system that had protected and enabled such behavior for decades. The lobby of Millennium Tower buzzed with its usual activity. Lawyers, executives, and consultants moving between meetings, making deals, wielding power. For most of them, this was just another Tuesday. They had no idea that something seismic had just occurred, 45 floors above their heads. Vanessa walked to her car in the parking garage, her steps echoing off the concrete walls. Once inside her vehicle, she finally allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. Her hands shook slightly as she connected her phone to her laptop and began uploading the recording to a secure cloud server. This evidence was too important to risk losing. But before she called her attorney, before she contacted the disciplinary authorities, before she started the process that would destroy 4 legal careers, Vanessa made a different call. "Sandra, it's Vanessa Reynolds. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sandra Chen was another mediator, a colleague Vanessa had known for years. They'd often compared notes about difficult cases and challenging attorneys, but now Vanessa suspected those conversations had been more significant than either of them had realized. Of course, Vanessa. What's going on? Have you ever had problems with Logan Beaumont or his team at Whitman, Kessler? The pause that followed told Vanessa everything she needed to know. Vanessa, what happened? Over the next hour, as Vanessa sat in her car making similar calls to other female mediators, arbitrators and attorneys, a pattern emerged that was even more disturbing than she'd anticipated. Logan Beaumont's team had a history, a long documented history, of intimidating women who held positions of authority in legal proceedings. There was Rebecca Martinez, an arbitrator who'd been accidentally cornered in a bathroom during a break and told she was in over her head on a complex construction dispute. There was Jennifer Kim, an opposing counsel who'd been surrounded by Beaumont's team during settlement negotiations and told she was too emotional to handle commercial litigation. There was Dr. Patricia Johnson, an expert witness who'd been systematically undermined and dismissed during cross-examination with racially charged questions about her real qualifications. Each woman had her own story of intimidation, humiliation, and professional undermining. Each had considered filing complaints, but worried about retaliation from one of the most powerful firms in Chicago. Each had ultimately decided to stay quiet and hope it didn't happen again. But now, for the first time, someone had evidence. As Vanessa finished her calls, she realized the scope of what she was about to unleash. This wasn't just about 4 men who'd lost their tempers in a mediation. This was about a systematic pattern of discrimination and intimidation that had been operating with impunity for years. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Thompson, her attorney and longtime friend. Marcus, thank God, I need to see you immediately, and bring your litigation team. We're about to file the biggest professional misconduct case this city has seen in decades. Vanessa, what happened? I sound like someone who just caught 4 prominent attorneys committing assault and battery on video. How quickly can you get to your office? I'm walking in the door now. Vanessa, are you okay? I'm perfect, Marcus. But Logan Beaumont and his team at Whitman Kessler, their careers just ended, and they don't even know it yet. What they didn't realize was that this was about to become the story that changed everything. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't money or connections or intimidation. Sometimes it's simply the truth, properly documented and strategically deployed. Marcus Thompson's law office occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in Chicago's River North district. Unlike the marble and mahogany opulence of traditional corporate firms, Marcus had deliberately chosen a space that felt more like a tech startup than a legal powerhouse. But what the casual atmosphere obscured was the fact that Thompson & Associates had become one of the most feared civil rights litigation firms in the Midwest. When Vanessa arrived at 2:30 p.m., she found Marcus had already assembled his core team. Sarah Williams, the firm's lead employment discrimination attorney, David Park, their expert on professional liability and legal ethics, and Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic technology specialist who could authenticate digital evidence in ways that would hold up under the most aggressive cross-examination. "Show us what you have," Marcus said without preamble. At 38, he'd built his reputation by taking on cases that other firms considered unwinnable. David versus Goliath battles against institutional discrimination that had made him wealthy and his opponents very, very nervous. Vanessa connected her phone to the conference room's audio system. "Before I play this, you need to understand the context. These aren't just 4 attorneys having a bad day. This is a pattern of behavior that's been going on for years." She'd prepared meticulously for this moment. Her presentation included not just the recording from that morning, but also documentation from the phone calls she'd made afterward. Notes from 12 different women describing similar encounters with Logan Beaumont's team. Dates, locations, witnesses, and patterns of behavior that painted a picture of systematic intimidation. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered after hearing the first few minutes of the recording. "They actually put their hands on you." David Park, who specialized in legal ethics violations, was furiously taking notes. "This isn't just assault and battery. They've violated multiple rules of professional conduct. The Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct specifically address civility and professional courtesy. This is textbook misconduct. Doctor, Foster examined the phone and the recording with the intensity of a scientist studying a new species. The metadata confirms the time, date, and location. The audio quality is exceptional. We can clearly identify individual voices. And the fact that Illinois is a one-party consent state means this recording is not only admissible, it's devastating. But Marcus was thinking bigger picture. Vanessa, you said there's a pattern. How many other women are willing to come forward? So far, 12 have agreed to provide statements, but I think there are more. Word is already spreading through the legal community. My phone has been ringing non-stop. Sarah leaned forward. We're not just talking about individual complaints here. This could be a class action lawsuit. Civil rights violations, creating a hostile environment for women and minorities in legal proceedings, systematic discrimination. The damages could be substantial, David added. Not just for Vanessa, but for every woman whose career was impacted by this behavior. Lost opportunities, professional humiliation, the psychological impact of being targeted. Dr. Foster looked up from her analysis. There's something else. I've been examining the recording more closely, and their language suggests this wasn't spontaneous. The way they coordinated their positioning, the specific phrases they used about paying for the mediation, and knowing their place, this feels rehearsed. Like they've done this before. Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking the Chicago River. After 15 years of civil rights litigation, he'd learned to recognize the cases that would change everything. This was one of them. Here's what we're going to do, he said finally. We file immediately, today, multiple tracks simultaneously, criminal complaints for assault and battery, professional conduct complaints with the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission, a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, and we go public. Public? Vanessa asked. Are you sure? Vanessa, this isn't just about what happened to you today. This is about every woman who's been intimidated out of speaking up, every minority professional who's been made to feel like they don't belong in these spaces. If we stay quiet, if we handle this through back-channel negotiations and private settlements, nothing changes. But if we expose this, Sarah nodded emphatically. If we expose this, it sends a message to every firm in this city that this behavior has consequences, real consequences. David was already drafting press release language in his head. The story writes itself. Prominent law firm partners caught on tape assaulting black female mediator. The legal blogs will pick it up within hours. The mainstream media will follow. Dr. Foster smiled grimly. And the best part is they can't deny it. We have everything on tape, their voices, their actions, their complete lack of professional judgment. As the team began planning their multi-front assault on Whitman, Kessler and Associates, Vanessa felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for her own vindication, but for all the women who'd been silenced by fear of retaliation. But what none of them yet realized was that Logan Beaumont's team was about to make their situation much, much worse. If you think that what happens when someone posts a message on social media saying that they don't think Vanessa should have been treated this way, type respect below. While Vanessa and Marcus's team were preparing their legal assault, Logan Beaumont was making the worst decision of his professional life. At 4:45 p.m., as news of the morning's incident began circulating through Chicago's legal community, Logan called an emergency meeting with his partners at Whitman, Kessler and Associates. The firm's managing partner, Richard Whitman, was 67 years old and had spent 4 decades building one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate law practices. The mahogany-paneled conference room where they met had hosted meetings with Fortune 500 CEOs, federal judges, and politicians. It was a monument to power and influence. "Logan, please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding," Whitman said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I just got off the phone with 3 different clients asking about an incident at a mediation." Logan straightened his tie nervously. "Richard, it was a difficult mediation. The mediator was being unreasonable and things got a bit heated, but nothing happened that was outside the bounds of normal advocacy. Parker Spencer, Preston Maxwell and Lance Stone sat in uncomfortable silence. In the 6 hours since the incident, each had begun to realize the magnitude of their mistake. But Logan, perhaps because he had the most to lose, was doubling down on denial. A bit heated, Whitman's assistant had already briefed him on the phone calls coming in from other firms, the whispered conversations at the Chicago Bar Association, the rumors spreading like wildfire through the legal community. "Logan, I'm hearing words like assault and physical intimidation. Please tell me these are exaggerations." That's when Logan made his fatal error. Instead of coming clean, instead of acknowledging the severity of their actions and beginning damage control, he chose to minimize and deflect. "Richard, you know how these mediators can be. They get a little authority and suddenly think they're judges. Vanessa Reynolds was being completely unreasonable, questioning our client's position, trying to manage us instead of facilitating settlement. We just made it clear that we weren't going to be pushed around." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard Whitman had not built a successful law firm by tolerating partners who couldn't recognize legal and public relations disasters when they created them. "Logan," Whitman said carefully, "did you or any member of your team make physical contact with Ms. Reynolds?" Logan hesitated for just a moment too long. It was a crowded conference room. There may have been some incidental contact during the discussion. Preston Maxwell looked like he was going to be sick. Lance Stone was studying his hands intently. Parker Spencer seemed to be calculating whether he could distance himself from Logan's increasingly desperate narrative. "Incidental contact?" Whitman repeated slowly. "Logan, I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you handle difficult opposing counsel, hostile witnesses, and impossible clients. Are you telling me that you couldn't manage a single mediation without incidental contact with the neutral party?" Before Logan could respond, Whitman's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Whitman, I have Marcus Thompson on line 1. He says it's urgent and concerns the mediation this morning." Every attorney in the room knew Marcus Thompson's reputation. His name appearing in connection with their morning's difficult mediation was like seeing storm clouds gathering on a clear day. "Put him through," Whitman said, activating the speakerphone. Marcus's voice filled the room with professional courtesy that carried an unmistakable edge. "Richard, I'm calling as a professional courtesy before we file papers tomorrow morning. My client, Vanessa Reynolds, was assaulted by 4 of your attorneys during a mediation this morning. We have the entire incident documented. I'm hoping we can discuss this matter before it becomes public." Logan started to speak, but Whitman silenced him with a gesture that could have stopped traffic. "Marcus, I appreciate the call. Can you give me some details about these allegations? 4 of your partners, Logan Beaumont, Parker Spencer, Preston Maxwell, and Lance Stone, physically surrounded, restrained, and intimidated Ms. Reynolds during a mediation at Millennium Tower. The incident was recorded. We have clear documentation of assault, battery, false imprisonment, and multiple violations of professional conduct rules." The color drained from Logan's face. "Recorded." The word hit the room like a physical blow. "Marcus," Whitman said slowly, "are you saying this incident was captured on audio?" "Audio and video, Richard. High-definition video that clearly shows your attorneys using physical intimidation against a neutral mediator, along with statements from 12 other women describing similar patterns of behavior from the same team." Preston Maxwell stood up abruptly and walked to the window, as if looking for an escape route. Lance Stone was openly perspiring. Parker Spencer had begun frantically typing on his phone, probably texting his own attorney. But Logan, perhaps sensing that his career was already over, chose to go down fighting. "Marcus, this is ridiculous. Your client was being unprofessional and biased. We were advocating for our client's interests." Marcus's laugh was cold. "Logan, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to hang up now and give you 24 hours to retain personal counsel, because tomorrow morning this becomes a public matter. Criminal charges, civil rights violations, professional misconduct complaints, and a federal lawsuit. The recording will be filed as Exhibit A in every proceeding." The line went dead, leaving 6 attorneys sitting in stunned silence. Richard Whitman looked at Logan with the expression of a man watching his life's work crumble. "Logan, please tell me you didn't do what he just described." But Logan's response proved that even facing complete professional destruction, some people never learn. "Richard, she's just playing the race card. This is extortion, pure and simple." That was the moment Richard Whitman realized his firm was about to become the subject of the biggest legal scandal Chicago had seen in years. And it was the moment Logan Beaumont sealed his fate beyond any possibility of redemption, because some words once spoken can never be taken back. By 8 p.m. that evening, the earthquake had begun. Marcus Thompson's team had worked through dinner, preparing a comprehensive legal assault that would attack from every possible angle. But their most devastating weapon wasn't their legal briefs or expert witnesses. It was Logan Beaumont's own recorded words. "Doctor." Amanda Foster had spent hours analyzing the 23-minute recording, isolating key moments and preparing exhibits that would be impossible to deny or explain away. The technology was so precise that she could identify not just who was speaking, but the exact positioning of each person in the room based on voice dynamics and acoustic analysis. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a waveform analysis on her computer screen. "At timestamp 1432, you can clearly hear Preston Maxwell saying, 'Don't walk away from us,' while the acoustic signature shows he's moved to block the exit. At 1447, there's the sound of physical contact, clothing rustling, a chair scraping, exactly when Parker Spencer grabbed Vanessa's arm. Sarah Williams was preparing the civil rights complaint that would be filed in federal court. The pattern evidence is overwhelming. 12 women spanning 3 years, all describing similar intimidation tactics. Same language, same positioning techniques, same underlying message: know your place." David Park looked up from his disciplinary complaint research. "I've been going through Illinois attorney registration and disciplinary commission records. In the past 5 years, there have been 17 informal complaints filed against various members of Logan's team. 17. But they were all handled quietly, settled privately, or dismissed for lack of evidence." Marcus nodded grimly. "Which is exactly why this pattern continued. No consequences, no deterrence, no accountability, until now." As the team worked, Vanessa's phone continued ringing. Word was spreading through the legal community at light speed, and more women were coming forward with their own stories of intimidation and discrimination. At 8:30 p.m., Vanessa took a call that would add another dimension to their case. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Judge Patricia Harrison from the Cook County Circuit Court. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I've been hearing about what happened today, and I think you should know something." Judge Harrison was one of the most respected jurists in Illinois, a 20-year veteran of the bench, known for her fairness and legal scholarship. Her call was both unexpected and significant. "Of course, Your Honor. How can I help you?" "Ms. Reynolds, 6 months ago, Logan Beaumont's team appeared before me in a complex commercial case. During the proceedings, they made several motions that I found troubling. But what really concerned me was their behavior toward opposing counsel, a young black woman named Angela Foster from a smaller firm." Judge Harrison's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and stayed silent too long. Miss Foster was brilliant, well-prepared, and absolutely professional. But during every hearing, Logan's team would position themselves to physically dominate the courtroom space. They would interrupt her more frequently than necessary, question her qualifications in ways that seemed personal. And when she objected to their tactics, they would suggest she was being overly emotional or unprofessional. Vanessa felt her stomach tighten. The pattern was even more extensive than they had realized. "Your Honor, did you intervene?" "I maintained courtroom decorum, but I didn't address the underlying behavior directly. At the time, I told myself it was aggressive advocacy, but after hearing about today's incident..." "Ms. Reynolds, I've been a judge for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between zealous representation and systematic intimidation. What I witnessed was the latter." Judge Harrison paused, and when she continued, her voice was heavy with regret. "I should have done more. I should have called them out directly, sanctioned them, reported their behavior to the disciplinary commission. Instead, I let it slide, and they continued this pattern with you and God knows how many other women." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Judge Harrison providing specific dates, case numbers, and detailed observations about Logan's team's behavior. Her testimony would be crucial. Judges don't lightly criticize attorneys publicly, and her willingness to speak out would carry enormous weight with disciplinary authorities. After the call ended, Marcus looked at his team with something approaching awe. We're not just documenting isolated incidents anymore, we're exposing a systematic pattern of discrimination that extends into the courtroom itself. This is bigger than we thought. Sarah Williams was already updating her complaint. With Judge Harrison's testimony, we can demonstrate that this behavior has been ongoing, escalating, and witnessed by judicial authority. That's not just misconduct. That's institutional failure to address known discriminatory behavior. David Park nodded enthusiastically. And the fact that a sitting judge is willing to testify about courtroom intimidation tactics means the Illinois Supreme Court will have to take notice. This isn't just about bar discipline anymore. This is about the integrity of the legal system itself. Dr. Foster had been quietly working on another aspect of the evidence. I've been analyzing the metadata from Vanessa's phone, and I found something interesting. The recording software she uses automatically backs up to cloud storage. That means we have redundant copies of the evidence stored on servers in 3 different states, all with timestamp verification. Marcus smiled for the first time that day, which means even if they try to claim the evidence was tampered with or fabricated, we have multiple, independently verified copies. This case just became bulletproof. As the evening wore on, the scope of their legal strategy continued to expand. What had started as a straightforward assault case was becoming a comprehensive attack on institutional discrimination in Chicago's legal community. But across town, Logan Beaumont was about to make one final catastrophic mistake that would eliminate any possibility of damage control. Because some people, even when facing complete destruction, simply cannot stop digging their own graves deeper. At 9:15 p.m., Logan Beaumont sat in his home office in Lincoln Park, staring at his computer screen with the desperate intensity of a man watching his life collapse in real time. His Google alerts had been pinging constantly for the past 3 hours, as word of the incident spread through legal blogs, professional networks, and social media platforms. The prestigious home office, with its leather-bound law books and awards from various bar associations, felt like a museum to a career that was rapidly becoming history. Logan's wife, Catherine, had retreated upstairs after one look at his face when he'd arrived home. Their 2 teenage children had been banished to their rooms, sensing the adult crisis unfolding below. Logan's first instinct was damage control, but his approach revealed the same arrogance and tone deafness that had gotten him into this situation. Instead of hiring a crisis communications expert or keeping quiet while legal counsel developed a strategy, Logan decided to take matters into his own hands. He began with phone calls to clients, trying to get ahead of the story with his own version of events, but each conversation made things worse. "Jim, it's Logan. I wanted to reach out before you heard rumors about today's mediation." "No, Jim, it wasn't assault. It was a professional disagreement that got blown out of proportion. The mediator was being unreasonable and frankly unprofessional. We may have gotten a bit forceful in our advocacy, but nothing inappropriate happened." But Jim Morrison, CEO of one of Logan's biggest clients, had already received 3 phone calls about the incident. "Logan, I'm going to stop you right there. Marcus Thompson's office called me an hour ago. They said they have video evidence of you and your team physically restraining a black female mediator. Please tell me that's not true." Logan's pause was too long and too telling. "Jim, you know how these civil rights attorneys operate. They take normal advocacy and twist it into something sinister. This is about money, pure and simple. Logan, did you or did you not put your hands on this woman?" It was a crowded conference room, Jim. There may have been some incidental contact during a heated discussion, but nothing that rises to the level of, "Logan, stop talking right now. Don't call any more clients, don't talk to any more lawyers, and for God's sake, don't talk to the media. You need to hire criminal counsel immediately." The line went dead, leaving Logan staring at his phone in disbelief. Jim Morrison had been not just a client, but a friend for over 8 years. His immediate dismissal felt like a betrayal, which only fueled Logan's growing sense of injustice. That's when Logan made his most disastrous decision of the day. He decided to get ahead of the story by posting on LinkedIn, the professional social media platform where thousands of Chicago attorneys would see his message. The post, which he would later claim was drafted while under extreme stress, read, "I want to address rumors circulating about today's mediation. As attorneys, we have a duty to zealously advocate for our clients. When mediators overstep their authority and attempt to manipulate proceedings, we have an obligation to assert our clients' interests firmly. What happened today was aggressive advocacy in a high-stakes commercial dispute. Attempts to characterize normal legal advocacy as assault or discrimination are nothing more than opportunistic litigation tactics designed to extract settlements through public pressure rather than legal merit. I stand by my team's professionalism and will vigorously defend against any frivolous claims." The post went live at 10:43 p.m. By 10:45 p.m., it had received its first comment from Sarah Williams at Marcus Thompson's firm. "Mr. Beaumont, this post will be entered as evidence in all proceedings. Thank you for the additional documentation of your mindset and lack of remorse." By 11:00 p.m., the post had been screenshot and shared across multiple legal platforms. Comments poured in from attorneys across the country, with the overwhelming majority expressing shock and disgust at Logan's tone-deaf response. Did he just double down on assaulting a mediator? "I've practiced law for 30 years and never seen anything this professionally suicidal." The lack of self-awareness is stunning. He's basically admitting to everything while claiming it was justified. Someone should forward this to the disciplinary commission. This is consciousness of guilt in real time. But the comment that would prove most damaging came from Dr. Patricia Johnson, the expert witness who had been intimidated by Logan's team 6 months earlier. She wrote, "Mr. Beaumont, I was the expert witness you and your team surrounded and dismissed as unqualified, despite my PhD in engineering and 20 years of industry experience. Your aggressive advocacy included questioning whether I had actually earned my degrees and suggesting I was hired as a diversity expert rather than for my technical knowledge. Today's incident with Ms. Reynolds is not isolated. It's part of a pattern of discrimination that you apparently believe is not only acceptable, but professionally required. I'm grateful someone finally had the courage and evidence to expose your behavior." Dr. Johnson's comment received over 200 likes within an hour and was shared by prominent attorneys across multiple states. More importantly, it provided additional evidence of Logan's pattern of discriminatory behavior, with specific details that corroborated the broader case Marcus Thompson was building. Logan, watching the digital assassination of his professional reputation unfold in real time, made one final desperate decision. At 11:47 p.m., he deleted the original post and attempted to replace it with a more contrite message. But screenshots of the original post had already been preserved by dozens of attorneys, and his attempt to cover his tracks only made him look more guilty and calculating. Marcus Thompson, who had been monitoring Logan's online activity as part of his opposition research, forwarded screenshots of both posts to his team with a simple message: "He's doing our job for us." This case just became even easier to win. By midnight, Logan Beaumont had managed to transform a serious but potentially manageable legal problem into a career-ending scandal that would be studied in legal ethics courses for decades to come. But what he didn't yet realize was that the real consequences were just beginning. Wednesday morning, October 16th, dawned gray and cold in Chicago, matching the mood at Whitman, Kessler & Associates. Richard Whitman had arrived at his office at 5:30 a.m. to find 17 phone messages from clients, 9 emails from other law firm managing partners, and a resignation letter from his firm's largest corporate client. The resignation letter, from the general counsel of a Fortune 100 manufacturing company, was brief and devastating. "Given recent events involving members of your firm, and considering our company's commitment to diversity and professional conduct, we will be transitioning our legal representation to other counsel effective immediately." By 7 a.m., Whitman had called an emergency partners meeting. The 15 partners who comprised the firm's leadership sat around the same mahogany table, where Logan had made his disastrous decision to minimize the previous day's events. But the atmosphere had changed completely. This was no longer about supporting a colleague through a difficult situation. This was about saving the firm itself. "Logan is finished," announced Patricia Mills, the firm's employment law specialist. "I've reviewed the recording that Marcus Thompson's office provided to us last night. It's indefensible. Clear assault, obvious discrimination, and Logan's LinkedIn post eliminated any possibility of claiming it was a misunderstanding." James Crawford, who headed the firm's white-collar criminal defense practice, nodded grimly. "I've been consulting with criminal defense colleagues. The state's attorney's office received the complaint this morning and will likely file charges by end of business today. Assault, battery, false imprisonment, all with video evidence. This isn't going away." Whitman looked around the table at the partners he'd worked with for decades to build one of Chicago's most successful firms. "Where do we stand financially?" The firm's managing director, Robert Chen, opened his laptop. 3 major clients have terminated representation since yesterday evening. 2 more are reviewing their relationship with us. Our malpractice carrier is conducting an emergency review of our coverage, and I've had preliminary discussions with headhunters. We're going to lose associates and junior partners who don't want this scandal on their resumes. But the most devastating news came from David Kim, who handled the firm's business development. "I've been in contact with our referral sources, other firms that send us business, former clients who recommend us to colleagues. The feedback is unanimous. Association with this scandal is toxic. One managing partner told me directly that they can't afford to be seen as supporting a firm whose partners assault women mediators." Patricia Mills cleared her throat. "There's something else. I've been contacted by 6 women, 3 attorneys, 2 expert witnesses, and a court reporter, who are now coming forward with their own stories about Logan's team. They're all represented by Marcus Thompson now, and they're all filing formal complaints." The room fell silent as the full scope of the disaster became clear. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been enabled and ignored for years, and which was now threatening to destroy everything they'd built. "What are our options?" Whitman asked quietly. Crawford spoke first. "Legally, we have to separate ourselves from Logan and his team immediately. No partnership protection, no legal representation, no financial support. They're on their own." "From a business perspective," Chen added, "we need to demonstrate that this behavior was not condoned or known by firm leadership. We need to implement new policies, undergo bias training, possibly bring in outside consultants to review our culture." Mills nodded. "And we need to reach out to every woman who's ever worked with or appeared before Logan's team. Proactive outreach, offer mediation services, demonstrate that we're taking this seriously." But Kim shook his head. "None of that matters if we don't survive the immediate crisis. I'm getting calls from reporters, legal publications, mainstream media, national outlets. This story is going viral. Prestigious Chicago law firm partners assault black mediator is going to be the headline in every legal publication in the country." That's when Whitman's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Whitman?" Channel 7 News is in the lobby. They're asking for a statement about yesterday's incident. The partners looked at each other with the shared realization that their private crisis had become public spectacle. Whitman stood slowly, straightening his tie with the same careful precision he'd used for 40 years of practicing law. "Patricia, draft termination letters for Logan, Parker, Preston, and Lance, effective immediately. James, coordinate with their personal counsel. We're providing no support or representation. Robert, prepare a statement for the media acknowledging the incident and our commitment to accountability." As the partners dispersed to begin the grim work of dismantling 4 legal careers and attempting to save their firm, none of them noticed Logan Beaumont standing in the parking garage across the street, watching through binoculars as reporters set up cameras outside the building. He'd called his professional home for 15 years. Logan had spent the night in his car, afraid to go home and face his family, afraid to show up at the office and face his partners, afraid to answer the hundreds of calls and emails that had turned his phone into an instrument of torture. But what he was about to do next would ensure that his disgrace became complete and irreversible. Because sometimes, when a person has lost everything, they decide to take everyone else down with them. At 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 16th, Logan Beaumont walked into the offices of the Chicago Tribune, carrying a thick manila folder and the desperate energy of a man with nothing left to lose. He'd spent the morning being fired by his law firm, served with criminal charges by the Cook County State's attorney, and notified by the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission that emergency suspension proceedings were being initiated. The reporter he'd called, Jennifer Walsh, covered legal affairs for the Tribune and had built her career on exposing corruption and misconduct in Chicago's legal and political establishments. When Logan's call came in offering an exclusive interview about the real story behind the mediation incident, she'd cleared her afternoon schedule. What Logan didn't realize was that Walsh had already been investigating rumors about his behavior for months, following tips from attorneys who'd witnessed his intimidation tactics but been reluctant to go on the record. His offer of an interview was like a Christmas gift to a reporter who'd been building a story about systematic discrimination in Chicago's legal community. "Mr. Beaumont," Walsh began, her digital recorder capturing every word. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Let's start with yesterday's incident. Can you walk me through what happened from your perspective?" Logan had convinced himself that he could control the narrative, that his years of courtroom advocacy had prepared him to handle a journalist. He was catastrophically wrong. "Jennifer, what happened yesterday was a complete mischaracterization of normal legal advocacy. Vanessa Reynolds was being unprofessional and biased from the moment we arrived. She was clearly trying to manipulate the mediation in favor of the other side, and when we tried to advocate for our client's interests, she became hostile and accusatory." Walsh nodded encouragingly. "Can you be more specific about how she was biased?" And that's when Logan made the mistake that would seal his fate forever. Instead of sticking to procedural complaints, he revealed the prejudices that had actually motivated his behavior. "Look, Jennifer, you have to understand the dynamics here. TechFlow is a small company run by a young black CEO who's clearly in over his head. Megacorp is a Fortune 500 company with sophisticated legal needs. The mediator should have recognized that one side had legitimate claims and the other was just trying to avoid responsibility for a clear breach of contract." Walsh's pen stopped moving. "Are you saying that the racial dynamics of the case influenced the mediation?" Logan, oblivious to the trap he was walking into, continued digging his own grave. "I'm saying that sometimes mediators bring their own perspectives to a case, and when you have a black mediator sympathizing with a black CEO against a major corporation, you have to wonder about neutrality." The silence in the conference room was deafening. Walsh had just gotten Logan Beaumont to admit on the record that he believed Vanessa Reynolds' race had influenced her professional judgment, and that this belief had justified his team's aggressive response. "Mr. Beaumont, are you suggesting that Ms. Reynolds' race made her incapable of being neutral?" Logan, perhaps sensing he'd gone too far, tried to backtrack. No, of course not. I'm just saying that everyone brings their own experiences to their work, and sometimes those experiences can create unconscious bias." "And you believed that Ms. Reynolds was unconsciously biased in favor of TechFlow because both she and the CEO are black?" Look, that's not what I said. You're twisting my words." But Walsh wasn't finished. She'd been saving her most devastating questions for the moment when Logan had fully committed to his narrative. "Mr. Beaumont, I've been investigating your team's behavior for several months. I have statements from 14 women describing similar incidents of intimidation and discrimination. Can you comment on the pattern of behavior they describe?" Logan's face went white. Those are false allegations from disgruntled attorneys trying to make money from frivolous lawsuits." Walsh opened her own folder, revealing printed emails, documented complaints, and sworn statements. "Dr. Patricia Johnson says your team questioned her qualifications as an expert witness by asking if she'd earned her engineering PhD through affirmative action. Attorney Rebecca Martinez says you told her she was too emotional to handle complex commercial litigation. Judge Patricia Harrison has provided a statement about your behavior in her courtroom. Are all of these women lying?" Logan stared at the documents, realizing that his worst nightmare was unfolding in real time. Look, this is clearly a coordinated attack on successful white male attorneys. This is reverse discrimination, and it's being orchestrated by Marcus Thompson, to generate publicity for his practice. With those words, Logan Beaumont completed his professional suicide. He had just accused 14 women, including a sitting judge, of lying in a coordinated conspiracy, while explicitly framing the issue in racial terms and claiming to be the victim of reverse discrimination. Walsh continued the interview for another 30 minutes, during which Logan made increasingly desperate and inflammatory statements. He questioned the competence of minority professionals, suggested that discrimination complaints were generally frivolous, and claimed that political correctness was destroying the legal profession. When the interview concluded, Walsh had enough material for a multi-part exposé that would run for a week and be picked up by national media outlets. But more importantly, she had captured Logan Beaumont providing additional evidence of the discriminatory mindset that had motivated his attack on Vanessa Reynolds. As Logan left the Tribune building, he felt a moment of satisfaction, believing he'd finally told his side of the story. What he didn't realize was that he had just provided the prosecution, the disciplinary commission, and Marcus Thompson's civil rights team with a recorded confession of discriminatory intent that would make their cases virtually unwinnable for his defense. By 6:00 p.m., advance copies of Walsh's article were circulating among Chicago's legal elite. The headline read, "Disgraced Attorney Claims Racial Bias, Justified Assault on Mediator." The subheading was even more damaging. Logan Beaumont suggests pattern of discrimination was normal legal advocacy. But what Logan didn't know was that the most devastating consequences were yet to come. Because while he'd been destroying his reputation with the Tribune, Vanessa Reynolds had been meeting with federal prosecutors about civil rights violations that carried potential prison time. The real reckoning was about to begin. 6 months later, on a crisp April morning in 2025, Vanessa Reynolds stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, surrounded by reporters, supporters, and the team of attorneys who had helped transform her moment of assault into a landmark case for civil rights in the legal profession. The journey from that terrible October day to this moment of vindication had been longer and more complex than anyone had anticipated. What started as a criminal assault case had evolved into a comprehensive reckoning with discrimination in Chicago's legal community that would reshape professional conduct for years to come. Logan Beaumont had pled guilty to assault and battery charges in February, receiving 6 months in county jail and 2 years of probation. His law license had been permanently revoked by the Illinois Supreme Court after a disciplinary hearing that featured testimony from 17 women describing similar patterns of intimidation and discrimination. Parker Spencer, Preston Maxwell, and Lance Stone had received lesser criminal penalties but faced their own professional destruction. Spencer had been suspended from practice for 5 years and was working as a compliance officer for a medical device company. Maxwell had relocated to another state and was attempting to rebuild his career in document review. Stone had left the law entirely and was managing a family restaurant in suburban Chicago. Whitman, Kessler and Associates had survived, but barely. The firm had paid $8, $7 million in settlements to the women who came forward, implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, and undergone a court-supervised cultural transformation that included mandatory bias training, independent oversight of case assignments, and regular audits of employee treatment. But the most significant change had been systemic. The Illinois State Bar Association had implemented new mandatory reporting requirements for incidents of discrimination and intimidation. The Chicago Bar Association had created an anonymous hotline for reporting professional misconduct, and law schools across the country had added Vanessa's case to their professional responsibility curricula as an example of how quickly careers could be destroyed by discriminatory behavior. "The significance of this case," said Judge Patricia Harrison, who had retired from the bench to become a full-time advocate for judicial reform, "is not just that justice was served in this particular instance. It's that we finally addressed the culture of intimidation that had been allowed to flourish in our legal system for far too long." Marcus Thompson had used the case to establish the Chicago Legal Equity Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting attorneys who face discrimination and harassment in their professional lives. The foundation, funded partly by the settlements from the Beaumont case, provided legal representation, counseling services, and professional support for attorneys from underrepresented communities. Vanessa's courage in recording that incident and her decision to fight back rather than accept a quiet settlement has changed the conversation about professional conduct in ways we're still discovering, Marcus said at the courthouse press conference. This case proved that accountability is possible, even when challenging the most powerful institutions in our profession. Dr. Patricia Johnson, the expert witness who had been intimidated by Logan's team, had become a prominent advocate for women in STEM fields who faced discrimination in legal proceedings. Her testimony in the Beaumont case had led to new guidelines for how expert witnesses should be treated during depositions and trial testimony. For too long, attorneys like Logan Beaumont used intimidation and discrimination as advocacy tools, Dr. Johnson said. They questioned our qualifications, dismissed our expertise, and made us feel like we didn't belong in professional settings. Vanessa's case sent a clear message that such behavior has consequences. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Sandra Chen, the mediator, who had been among the first to support Vanessa's decision to come forward. Sandra had documented her own experiences with discriminatory behavior and become a leader in reforming mediation practices to better protect neutral parties from intimidation. What Vanessa did wasn't just about seeking justice for herself, Sandra explained. She created space for all of us to speak truth about experiences we'd been told to endure silently. The legal profession is better today because she refused to accept that discrimination was the price of doing business. As the press conference concluded, Vanessa reflected on the personal cost and professional transformation that had resulted from those 23 minutes in a conference room. She had received death threats from lawyers who viewed her case as an attack on zealous advocacy. She had endured months of depositions, hearings, and media scrutiny that had turned her private trauma into public spectacle. But she had also received hundreds of letters from women attorneys, expert witnesses, mediators, and court personnel who thanked her for finally addressing behavior they had experienced but felt powerless to challenge. Law students wrote to say her case had inspired them to enter careers in civil rights law. Senior partners at major firms reached out to discuss implementing better policies for preventing discrimination. The hardest part, Vanessa said in her final interview, wasn't the assault itself or even the legal battles that followed. It was realizing how many women had experienced similar treatment and felt they had no recourse. If this case accomplished anything, I hope it's that other professionals know they don't have to accept intimidation and discrimination as normal parts of their careers. 6 months after the final settlements were reached, Logan Beaumont was released from county jail and moved to a small town in rural Illinois where he worked construction and avoided all contact with the legal profession. Parker Spencer was denied admission to the bar in 3 different states. Preston Maxwell's attempts to rebuild his career were repeatedly thwarted when potential employers discovered his role in the Beaumont case. Lance Stone, the youngest member of the team, had undergone the most dramatic transformation. After losing his law license, he had enrolled in social work school and was completing an internship with a domestic violence prevention organization. In rare interviews, he described the incident as the moment I realized I had become someone I didn't recognize and credited his criminal conviction with forcing him to confront prejudices he hadn't acknowledged. The conference room at Millennium Tower where the assault occurred had been renamed the Professional Conduct Training Room and was used exclusively for workshops on discrimination prevention and bias awareness. A small plaque by the door read, "Dedicated to ensuring that all legal professionals are treated with dignity and respect." But perhaps the most fitting legacy was simpler. In Chicago's legal community, the phrase "Remember Vanessa Reynolds" had become shorthand for the principle that professional conduct matters, that discrimination has consequences, and that even the most powerful institutions can be held accountable when individuals have the courage to demand justice. The legal profession had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the culture of intimidation and discrimination that had been tolerated for decades was not just morally wrong, but professionally unsustainable in a diverse and evolving society. And it all started with one woman who refused to accept that assault and intimidation were the price of professional authority. As Vanessa walked away from the courthouse for the final time, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of justice served, but the knowledge that her courage had created lasting change for the countless women who would follow in her footsteps. Thank you to everyone who typed respect, and to all who shared their locations from around the world. Your global support means everything. If these stories inspire you, please subscribe to join our community and help us share more incredible tales of courage and justice. Until next time, keep believing in the power of truth.